Hello, and welcome everyone to the latest episode of the Creative Confidence Podcast. I'm Colita Stafford, a partner at IDEO. On this podcast, we host conversations with special guests on creativity, leadership, and innovation. As you are joining, please tell us where you're calling from in the chat. We'll always open up the last few minutes for your questions, so feel free to start thinking of them. I am thrilled to welcome Jennifer Riel. Hi, Jennifer.
Hey, Co, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Let me give you a proper intro, Jennifer. So Jennifer is a partner and global director of strategy at IDEO. She's also our instructor of our newest course called Activating Strategy, which is, of course, our topic today. And that course launches in November. Today, we're going to be talking about why it can feel so challenging to activate your strategy, to take it from a piece of paper or an idea to real change, and some myths around activating strategy that might resonate with some of you. Welcome, Jennifer. So I would just love to start by what's something happening in your world this week that sparked joy or got you thinking about things?
Well, I am Canadian. I'm calling in from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And we are a little bit behind here in Canada on our consumption of the Great British Baking Show. We're a little behind the US and the British versions. But I discovered this week that there was an entire season available on CBC On Demand that I had not watched yet. And so I am deeply excited. That sparked a great deal of joy for me that I could now sit and watch an entire season of the Great British Baking Show in my living room.
Lindsay would love to +1 that, as well as some other Canadians. No spoilers.
No spoilers.
By the way,
I swear.
No spoilers.
I swear. No, we're behind. And we do in fact have a great Canadian baking show as well, which is also excellent.
I love it. So Jennifer, we can talk strategy or baking. So
yeah.
I think today we'll go strategy, but good to know for another time. Um, so I'm going to give Jennifer a full introduction. And while I do that, though, I'm going to put a poll up because I would love to hear from all of you joining today around how confident are you in your organization's ability to implement strategy? I know this is a big question, but I'm just going to start there. And I'd love to hear on a range from not at all confident to extremely confident. So I'll leave this up for about 30 seconds. And while you're giving us that, let me tell you more about Jennifer and why we're curious about this question. So Jennifer has led strategy processes at large public and private sectors around the world. You were a strategic advisor to many leaders in Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 companies. Jennifer is also an adjunct professor at the Rotman School of Management, where she teaches strategy, innovation, and design thinking. You are an author of a variety of things in articles in Harvard Business Review, as well as a wonderful book, which I highly recommend, called Creating Great Choices, which you co-authored with a good colleague of yours, Roger Martin. And as she mentioned, she's a proud Canadian. One thing that I care about too is she is also an instructor at IDEO U in two of our courses. One of some of you may be familiar with, which is about designing strategy, and then one that's about to come out in November called Activating Strategy. And that's what we're going to talk about today. In particular, we're going to talk about why it's critical for creating strategy, why being human-centered is critical in creating strategy. And then we're going to cover 7 common myths that slow or block strategy and how you might reframe your thinking. It wouldn't be Jennifer if we didn't leave this session with all of you feeling a bit more empowered on how you can be more impactful in your strategy. So can't wait. So let's just get going, right? Let's close this poll. Let's see, what do people say around their confidence? So Jennifer, you want to look at this with me? What do you see in this?
I mean, that feels about right. Somewhat confident, but with some major concerns. I'm glad we don't have too many in the not at all confident bucket, but somewhat confident to neutral feels similar to my own experiences in the world. That feels about right to me. What do you think, Co?
Yeah, I always like seeing it's a bit of a bell curve. We have people all across the board. That's almost reassuring. Yeah. But let's really help each other out with for those of us who don't feel so confident or feel neutral. So before we get into some of the myths, what do you mean by strategy, Jennifer? Can you just set context for us?
Absolutely. It feels like such a simple question, but it never turns out to be all that simple. There are lots of definitions of strategy out there, but here's how I boil it down for me. Strategy is the set of choices and actions that you take to position your organization to win in a specific way. And there are a few important elements of that. So it's choices and actions. It's not just one, it's both. When I say positioning you to win, that means you won't know for sure that it's going to work, right? You're placing some bets. It is forward looking. And then finally, it's specific, right? Real choices. We will do some things and we won't do others. And that's incredibly important part of strategy. If you're trying to do everything, be all things to all people, you're almost certainly going to struggle and you're going to leave a lot of value on the table.
What a great defining point too with what you're not doing. Thank you for clarifying that. So I've heard you talk before about it's really important to bring a human-centered mindset to strategy. What does that mean and why is that important? I think I have to admit, I often think about data or analytics as like what is important to strategy, and I don't think I often think about human-centered.
Well, it's been incredibly inspiring to me to think of strategy in this way. I think you're right. Lots of organizations, lots of individuals tend to take a very analytical approach to strategy, and that's valuable. We need to understand the world as it is. We need to use data to our advantage. But human centricity is about the acknowledgement that strategy is just a piece of paper without the human beings who are going to bring it to life. And sometimes organizations will pretend that's not true, right? They will say, as long as the strategy is brilliant, created by a super smart, small group of humans, it will be so irresistible, it will just happen in the world. But bringing a mindset of human centricity says everyone in your organization wants to succeed. They want to do a good job. They need to understand the strategy. They need to feel engaged in it in order to effectively do that. And so we want to be able to think about starting a strategy process as we do any design process. And that is fundamentally by starting with real human beings, their needs, and then getting tangible about abstract ideas so you can engage with those humans in a richer way. And then testing and learning so you can help those individuals build their confidence in what it is that you're creating together. So design thinking starts with human centricity, and strategy is something that can be designed. So I think it all comes back to the real people for whom you are building your strategy.
Oh, that's lovely. And so I loved in that you weren't just talking about customers, which is part of it, but all the people in the org is how you think about it. That is, we'll talk more about that. So I would love to, let's move into some common myths and some ways people might reframe their thinking. Before I get into the first myth, I have another poll. So if we can put that up, and this is going to be a rapid fire one. I would love for you to each share who is responsible for creating strategy at your org. Select all that apply. So everything from C-suite to directors, team leaders, individual contributors, other. So while you're answering that, I want to just give a little context for myths. So Jennifer, you have worked with a lot of organizations, companies around the world like Procter & Gamble, Ford, Google, and more. So you and through this, you've seen common behaviors or misconceptions around strategy. And the first one we're going to talk about is who should be creating it. So let's close this poll and just see, like, what is the range of ideas people have? So why don't you go ahead and speak to this, Jennifer? What do you see here?
I think, again, this looks a lot like we might expect it to look. We certainly see a large group for whom the C-suite is ultimately creating strategy at their organization. Others, it's happening at the director level or the team leader level. And then, of course, all of the above. I tend to think all of the above is the right answer in this case. Strategy is what you do every day. We're all doing things, prioritizing our time and our resources. But I think there are lots of organizations where strategy is held very tightly in the C-suite.
So we should say, like, so that first myth is the right way to do strategy is with a very small group of people. Why is that not the way to think about it? And how should we reframe our thinking?
So I think you do need to have a group of people who have the capability and accountabilities around the strategy to work together. But that's a little different than saying, these three people are going to create the strategy all by themselves in a locked room and then tell the organization to execute on it. And why do people do it? Lots of organizations take that approach. I think they do it because it feels more manageable. I feel tired thinking about needing to bring all of these people in the organization along with us. If we just build this beautiful strategy, they will come, right? It's that hope that you can actually get the right people in the room and move faster. So a smaller group is going to make us move more quickly. But for me, that is assuming that the time that is relevant is the time from when that small group starts working on creating the strategy to when that small group shares it with the organization and says, go do it. And I think that's not a very relevant time frame. The time frame we should care about is from the beginning of strategy creation to effective action on that strategy. And I would argue that if you have a more integrated design process that considers activation, that invites others in at the right moments and in the right ways, is more human-centered, you are going to have actually a much shorter time horizon from the beginning to effective action in the world. Yeah, I think it's not that people don't want to do what's asked of them. It's that they don't understand what's being asked of them. And so we need to design our strategy process, our approach to strategy with activation in mind, with the people who are going to need to take action in mind, so that we're bringing them along and we can move more quickly, as it says in the chat, right? We want to move far, not just fast. Absolutely.
And Tricia would like to just emphasize that is such a good point. That is to reconsider what is the time horizon that you're actually evaluating this. It's not just until we have the strategy. It's, you said, until it has impact. And so taking time to engage more folks early on is actually how you then speed up the time to impact. It's a great way of thinking about it. So let's go to a second myth. And I do have another quick poll, and then this is my last poll, everybody. It's so Jennifer, you mentioned like this idea of executing strategy. So let's talk about that. So who is responsible? Who do you think is responsible for executing strategy at your org? Again, I would love to hear from folks. And it's, again, same multiple choice, everything from C-suite to directors, team leaders, all of the above. And this is really what we want to get to here is what is the myth for who should be activating strategy? Let's go ahead and close that and see what we have. And I'm guessing, so here we have a lot of you acknowledging it should be all of the above. And actually, and what's interesting too is very few people feel the C-suite should be involved with executing. So Jennifer, I think there is a myth that, well, I think there's a lot of different thoughts around this, but there is a myth that maybe only the leaders are responsible for executing strategy.
I think maybe the myth is that only the leaders are responsible for creating it, and that other people are responsible for executing it would be, I think, the misconception that's out there. And that's partly tied to the idea that an organization has a strategy. And unless you're teeny tiny, unless you're one person or have a very simple organization that's really just doing or selling one thing, there really is no single strategy that covers everybody. So think about IDEO. We're not huge. We're about 800 people or so. And we have an IDEO level strategy. And that IDEO level strategy is about what kinds of businesses are we in? We do consulting, we do learning, we do investing. But then IDEO U has to have a strategy too, right? It has to say, this is how we think about all of our courses, and the specific programs have a strategy, right? We have a new course that's coming out, and there needed to be a strategy for choosing the right course and who is going to help bring it together, and all of those things. Everyone in an organization is making choices every single day. Whatever their domain of control, they're making choices about how to allocate their time. And so we tend to think of strategy as happening, creation at the top and then execution at the bottom. Every one of us needs to do both. Every one of us needs the ability to design our choices and to take action on them. And this is challenging. I understand that. But it's more challenging not to engage in this way, like to pretend that that's not the challenge that we face, and just to say, here's the one strategy, go do it. Because think about it. If someone told you, I, genius, have designed a brilliant strategy, go do it.
Right.
Like, turn off your brain, just go do what I told you to do. That's an incredibly demoralizing way of thinking about a person's job, and incredibly limiting in terms of human potential. I have nothing but faith and belief in what human beings can do when they put their mind to it. And so I want to make sure that we are designing in a way that enables people to find their own way in the strategy process.
That makes so much sense. There's so many great comments coming in from that, this idea of adoption and people feeling ownership and investment in it. So you kind of touched on this, but let's go to a third myth that we sometimes hear, this idea that the creation of strategy is separate from the activation. Mm-hmm. I think that is a pretty entrenched mental model a lot of people have. Talk to me about this myth.
Yeah. And I mean, it is manifest in the fact that lots of companies hire outsiders to do their strategy, right? They hire firms to do their strategy, and then we're just going to bring it to life in the organization. And I think for those of you who've been in organizations that did that, you may recognize the frustration of like, where did this come from? And what am I supposed to do with it? Absolutely. And so you are always better to think about strategy and activation together as a journey that you need to design as you go along. You need to think about activation from the beginning, and you need to continue to embed strategy even during the activation phase. People separated because it feels easier. It feels like you can just do change management after you tell people what to do. So that feels more approachable. And it is embedded in the confidence that my strategy will be so brilliant that other people will just obviously know what to do and want to do it. But it leaves so much to chance. We need to bring people in for two reasons. Bringing people into your strategy process makes it better, right? Very often, there is a limited view at any given level of the organization, right? Even the smartest, most well-intentioned people can only see and hold so much. And so you need to figure out who holds information that I don't have that can help me make this strategy better. How do I invite them in to the process, again, at the right moments and the right times? It's not saying let's have a strategy team with 200 people on it, because that would be hard. But we do want people to understand what the strategy is, where it came from, their role in it, what it means for their choices. People don't want to fail. No. And if we don't give them resources, if we don't bring them along, they're going to be way less inclined to do the hard work of activating a strategy. There's a legacy in organizations of strategy as a piece of paper. And we want to say it doesn't have to be that way, right? We want the most important stakeholders in your organization to understand the choices that are being made and why they're being made. We want them to understand the implications for their own role and be willing to take the steps to bring the strategy to life. But for that to happen, you can't just hand them the piece of paper or tell them a pretty story. No matter how great the video is that you're going to produce, I'm sure it will be the best video ever to tell people what the new strategy is. It's not enough, right? You need to bring people along. You need a core team that is deeply engaged in creating the strategy, absolutely. But part of their job is engaging the rest of the organization at those key moments. Having an extended team that is a thought partner to help you understand what you don't understand, seeking out subject matter experts where you lack knowledge around a particular thing, engaging with the sponsors of your strategy, your bosses or the board of director, not just handing them a fait accompli at the end. You need to bring people along so they can see how you wound up where you wound up. So it makes the strategy better, and it also makes it more likely that people will take action on it. Oh, we can't hear you, Ko. Is it just me? Can other people hear Ko? We cannot hear you, Ko. Can people hear me? Okay. I'll just randomly keep talking for fun. No, we'll give Ko a second.
Can folks hear me now?
Yes.
Great. We'll go with this. I am so sorry. That's how you know this is live, everybody. I am having some technical difficulties. So Jennifer, we're just going to keep your voice active. Let's go to myth number 4. This idea that strategy is mainly a thinking task. What do you think of that?
I mean, IDEO is a design firm, so joining IDEO certainly pushed me beyond my comfort zone in terms of strategy as a cognitive or thinking task. I would say the truth here is that strategy is both a thinking and doing task when done well. Everyone's brain operates differently. When we think of strategy as a purely intellectual or cognitive task, we tend to leave big gaps. We make big assumptions. We just leave a lot implicit. If you're able to bring in tangibility, if you're able to think of strategy as doing, whether that's building prototypes, whether that's testing to learn, whether that's thinking of the initial activation as part of the creation of the strategy. It's just a more robust way of tackling the problem. Strategy is thinking and doing. Strategy is thinking and feeling. You have to imagine the feelings people will have as the strategy is created and as it's rolled out. Part of the reason for resistance or reactance is when people are scared. Change is almost always scary. Even if we don't like the status quo, we at least know what it is. It's predictable in some sense, or maybe the last 3 years have not been as predictable, but typically the status quo is pretty predictable. And so we want to translate pieces of paper with words to something human beings can physically, emotionally, visually experience. People learn differently. There are kinesthetic learners who learn through movement. There are auditory learners who learn from hearing. Many visual learners who need an image in order to process. And certainly people who need to go to a quiet space and process on their own. Others who need to process by engaging in discussion and shared synthesis. So think about how you are going to engage people in these different ways, acknowledging different learning styles. But also think about stories. Stories, as we see in the chat, incredibly powerful way of making strategy real for people. So for instance, we did a project earlier this year with a big US consumer bank. And the brief for us was around, broadly speaking, a new consumer banking strategy, but really it was about thinking deeply about the retail banking experience. So what it's like for you when you engage with your bank on your savings, your credit, your mortgage, whatever it might be. For many of us, that's not a brilliant experience with our current banking provider. No. I will reach out on a limb and say it has typically not been a great human empathic experience. Sometimes it feels like our banks secretly hate us and are conspiring to make us crazy. And so it was a really interesting challenge where we could engage with that bank's consumers and people who weren't using that bank, imagine future experiences around new value propositions. And we started sharing these back with the executives. It was very early days, so we just wanted to get their directional reactions. So we shared them as little mini strategies, like here's where we'd play and here's how we'd win. And we got crickets in that conversation. They were just like, what are you even? I don't even know how to respond. And so we quickly went away and turned each of those strategies into a little visualized story of how the consumer would experience the bank differently if we chose that path. And it changed the conversation dramatically. They weren't holistic. They didn't capture everything about the strategy, but it made the strategy real in a way that our words or our framework didn't. And so this is, again, it's an empathy moment. What does making a narrative and making that narrative visual and specific and centered on the consumer, all of those things, what does that do to help us understand the true intent? And it enabled just a much richer conversation. It's true when we do design and innovation. It's absolutely true in the same way when we do strategy work, maybe even more so, because strategy can feel really abstract and high level. How do you get it to a level of concreteness, the for instance, or here's how it would feel that people need?
Thank you so much for such a tangible story. And Tina, again, it's about I love that you brought the word feelings into strategy and like the power of a story so people can understand it, not just in their head, but in their heart and making it tangible. So Jennifer, not surprisingly, we have an incredibly smart audience who's asking questions around myths you were about to get to. So I'm just going to jump to two of them. So Faye wanted to know, is strategy a living document? How often should we revisit it? And so one of the myths that we know is out there is that you do strategy one time a year. Do you want to speak to that one? And then I have another one that's queued up as well.
Yeah. So I say, I wish the myth was that you do strategy one time a year. There's a bunch of places where you do strategy once every 5 years, which is even longer. You do planning once a year and real strategy once every 5. And that's partly true. There need to be moments of intensive effort on a strategy. It is useful to have moments on the calendar that force you to look at the strategy and say, is it still fit for purpose? More effective is using the market to tell you whether your strategy is working or not. If you have something that isn't working, you can wait for 3 years until the end of the strategy to turn off that dial, or you can say, no, the strategy isn't playing out as we expected. What's our problem to be solved? Let's figure out how we need to shift it. But it's also the sense that strategy is something that should inform every leadership conversation you're having. So if strategy is the most important set of things we're doing to position ourselves to win, it's crazy to think we would only talk about that once a year or once every few years. We should be using our choices in strategy to frame up regular leadership conversations about how is that going, what's working, what's not, what do we see as early signals or new opportunities. So it becomes a part of the work that you do every day. It's a focus of how you talk to each other about the performance of the company. And so when things aren't working, you need to revisit. It's not about wildly shifting on a whim, but it is about saying we need a cadence of strategy discussions where we can thoughtfully assess what's working and what's not about this strategy and what might need to change. And yes, there will be moments where we do that more deeply because we have carved out time to do it. I don't want to dismiss the importance of that carved out time. It can be hard otherwise to actually do it deeply.
That's super helpful, Jennifer. And it actually relates to a 6th myth that I want to talk about. You need 100% certainty before you execute. And so what you're saying, though, is a much more dynamic process, it sounds like.
Well,
so tell me about that.
Yeah, I'm either optimistic or cynical about this. So maybe the cynical way is I don't think certainty is possible about anything, literally anything, right? Our world is incredibly complex. We can have more or less confidence. We can be very confident about certain things, but you just never know. If someone had said to me 3 years ago that, you and I would be doing this webcast like this, I'm in my room in Toronto and
I'm in San Francisco.
In San Francisco, and we figured out a way to make that feel good and rich and robust. I would have said, come on, we are a decade or more away from that level of, ability to collaborate across distance. Turns out, needs must, we're there. So I don't believe it's possible to be certain. The thing that maybe is the optimistic slant on that is that doesn't mean you can't take action. If you embrace the idea that we can be more or less confident, but never totally certain, then you can think of the entire process of creating and activating strategy as a journey to confidence. Right.
I love that.
The most powerful thing for me about design as a discipline, design as a way of being in the world, is that it is a journey to confidence. Designs inevitably start out as like a little spark of an idea, and that idea is almost never good. And we build it and we get told what's wrong with it and we break it, and then we build it again, slightly better, slightly higher resolution. We build it again, we build it again, we build it again, until we have enough confidence to say this will never work. Let's move on to the next thing. Or yes, this version, this flavor, let's now get this out into the world. And the journey of really great designs is always a journey from idea to an evolving product in the market. And so I think I'm optimistic in that sense that we can have a journey to confidence over time. If you're thinking of your end goal as certainty, you're never going to get there, right? And I want to be fair to people. There's a reason we like to be certain. There's actual physical rewards in your body when your brain comes to closure. You get an actual physical reward when you tick something off your to-do list or whatever it might be. But it's a false happiness, right? And so instead, striving for confidence, enough confidence to take the next step and the next step and the next step is really how we think about it.
That is so powerful. Thank you, Jennifer. And I think a lot of people, but Claire, I am keeping the journey to confidence. So I do have one last myth to talk about, and Winston actually has called it out as well. And then we'll move into questions.
Yeah.
It's this idea of number 7 is there's only one right framework or one way to do strategy. And we've had people ask, what do you recommend, Jennifer, as a framework? So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on the approach to strategy?
I love this question. So there is no one right framework for strategy work. We know that every different organization, every different academic are putting out new approaches. But think of it, a framework, if it's a good framework, is just a way to help you structure your thinking. So whatever framework feels powerful and useful to you in your context, I am all about it. I've seen strategy frameworks that are like, our company is a house. And I've seen strategy frameworks, from consulting firms that are about horizons or, ways of structuring, thinking about the stages of your business. Yes, visual metaphors are often really helpful. OGSM is a very common one. Our objectives, our goals, our strategy, and our measures. Whatever structure you use, it should be about the intent. And the intent is articulating clear choices. Yes, this, not that. In a way that people can do something tomorrow. Clarity, specificity, with understanding, vivid in whatever way you can make it vivid. Those are the considerations, no matter what language system you're using, no matter how you tackle it. I happen to find the approach and the language system, the frameworks articulated in Playing to Win, which I worked on with Roger Martin and H.G. Lafley, to be very intuitive enough to use in lots of different kinds of organizations in different contexts. The language is fairly simple. The questions are flexible enough that you can apply them. So I use that as one of the ways to articulate strategy, not the only, but a way of checking that I have actually thought through the most important dimensions of a strategy, a shared aspiration, a clear playing field, an understanding of sources of competitive advantage, and then the capabilities and systems required to actually produce that advantage and make sure the strategy is working. And again, with process, different organizations use different processes. My least favorite is taking the last strategy and just saying, what worked, what didn't, let's just tweak it. Not my favorite. But lots of people do it. I think more effective is, yes, look at the current strategy, but also explore other choices. Think about the gap that you're currently feeling between the outcomes you have and the outcomes you wished you'd have. That helps you frame up a problem that you want to solve. And then you can use different possibilities to think about, if we wanted that problem to go away, where might we play? How might we win? What choices could we make? And then use those possibilities to get visual, to stress test, to build and prototype in the world, so that you're building confidence over time. Whatever language system you use, I think that there is a general sense of start with a problem, build possibilities, get concrete, test, and then choose. And if you're bringing people along, they won't be surprised by what that choice is. And you will be pre-thinking about what will have to happen as you're making that choice, as you're getting this strategy out into the world.
That's what I keep hearing from you, Jennifer, is regardless of the process, make sure you're bringing people along is a key part that I keep hearing you say. And tangible, making it tangible. Yep. We have so many great questions. I want to go to Jennifer. You'll love this. It's a theme of cooking, but not the type of cooking you might be thinking. this idea of too many cooks in the kitchen. We have quite a few folks asking. So yeah, Ava asked, if everyone is involved, how do you actually make decisions then? Or Herman, the strategy process should not be a consensus. So
Absolutely.
How do you guide teams to think about co-creating, bringing many people along, and yet making very specific choices, which you've talked about?
So to be clear, I do believe there should be a core team that is shepherding the process and is accountable for the creation and the activation of the strategy. And that is not a huge team, because there is a limit to how big a team can be before it becomes unworkable in real terms. And the magic number, there's good data around this, somewhere between 6 and 8 people as the core. And again, that core group of people should understand the context, have real accountability, and have the space and capacity to work together really deeply on the strategy. They should be the ones who are ultimately doing the heavy lifting. But part of the heavy lifting is figuring out who else to engage and how. So I think of an extended team. Depending on your organization, that could be a handful of people, or if you're in a really big or very consensus driven or public or not-for-profit organization, often the extended team is much bigger. This is where you need to be able to think, when might I bring them in that would help them understand where we're going, but also make my thinking better? So if it were me, I would want to bring that extended team in when I had some possibilities. Okay, here's a set of 3 possibilities we think might be the future strategy. Help us make them better and help us see what we might be missing. And you can do that with the people who work for you. You can do that with your peers, and you can do that with the sponsors of the strategy, so that they're seeing, relative to the problem, here's where we're thinking we might go. Make your thinking better, bring them along, see what you're missing. I would also bring that extended team in as I'm starting to think about how I would test these possibilities. As they're getting more concrete, as I'm starting to think about the things that would have to be true and how I could test them, I want to bring that core team back and say, what do you see? How could you help us do some of this testing? Maybe bring in some subject matter experts. There's a particular technical challenge to making this work. I don't have the expertise to know whether that's possible. Oh, but our brilliant CTO, Wes, he would know the answer to this. I'm going to bring him into this conversation now. And then again, thinking at the end, how do you bring people in, both the extended team, your sponsors, the larger organization, through storytelling, through engagement moments, as you're helping them understand what the strategy is. And some of that is about explicitly saying, what does this look like for you? Let's sense make together. I believe this is going to create some choices for you to make. What choices do you think they are? So an enabling conversation for them to go and make the strategy their own.
Jennifer, you anticipate and kind of cover each question. Like, we had someone just ask, how do you get buy-in from others? Like more. And so like you just covered some of those strategies. It's creating these moments for, what do you think? Input, reflection, part of the participation. I hear in your way of talking about it, there's a core team. We might think of it as converging and diverging. So diverging with many, making some choices, converging, and doing that in cycles. Is that one way to also think about how to keep the collaboration moving while also making choices within?
Absolutely. I think the other big part of it is being really clear about what moment you're in with people. So
that's great.
When I joined IDEO for the first time, let me tell you, IDEO is a diverging organization. Like I would be in a conversation with people and I'd say, please go do this task in which you're going to narrow. And they would come back with 3 new questions. And I'm like, that is not what we asked you to do, but we can't help ourselves. We're questioners. So I think you need to be really clear with people about the moment that you're in. You have to be very authentic. And my number one piece of advice, leadership advice in life is this. If you don't want advice and you're not planning to use it, don't ask for it. Don't pretend. The single most frustrating, disempowering thing leaders do is pretending that their people have a voice if they don't. I believe people should have a voice. I believe that leaders need to listen and then make decisions. That's not the same as consensus. Listen and then make decisions. But the listen fakely, pretend I'm listening, is so damaging. So damaging.
You have so much support for that, Jennifer. And because we are at the end of our time, I am going to let you close us out with another piece of advice, and I'll let you pick that in just a moment. But I do want to thank everyone. I do want to thank Curtis. There was a wonderful thread on Curtis highly agrees with this idea too of being clear about the moment you're in. If you're diverging, if you're converging, and being intentional about that.
Yeah.
So we are out of time. Jennifer, we'll let you close us out with advice you wish you had received when you were early in your career or younger self. I'll let you think on that. While you think on that, I just want to thank everyone for joining. Thank you so much for your questions and all of the perspectives shared. We didn't even get to a lot of the questions.
Oh my goodness.
We've been talking with IDEO partner and Global Director of Strategy, Jennifer Riel. And as you know, as I've mentioned, she is going to be launching a new course with us in November, all around activating strategy. You'll go deeper into topics discussed today. There's a lot of great frameworks and tools and mindsets, and you'll learn human-centered approaches for bringing your strategy to life. You can learn more about that at ideou.com/activate. And with that, Jennifer, I think we're ready for just any other advice and wisdom you have. Close us out.
So we'll keep all the questions. They maybe will inform a future podcast. So thank you for asking all those questions. I have a little twitch when you say advice, because I have some scar tissue around advice. When I was 26 and in a fairly low level job, I remember talking to my boss's boss about maybe wanting a job that looked something like his one day. And he told me I was way too ambitious for my own good. And I still remember, so never say that to a human being, and certainly never say it to a young woman. Let's just say that. So I have lots of scar tissue around that. So here's my advice that I think maybe won't produce scar tissue, fingers crossed, which is I think it's more important to choose who you want to work with than what you want to work on. So people will often say, should I go work for this company or that company? Should I take this job or that job? And I've always chosen and found it to be really successful for me that I choose the people that I'm excited to work with and learn from or teach or engage with, that you're going to be in the trenches with those people day after day. It's going to get hard. Choose the people you want to work with.
Well spoken. That might explain why I keep inviting you back on this podcast. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Jennifer. So much wisdom. We'll have to give this another listen. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next time. Hope you have some ideas you want to take forward and try even this week. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.